Just after 5 o'clock, on the morning of December 4th, 2003, an employee arrived for work at a well drilling company in rural Pennsylvania. Near the edge of the property, beside a shallow creek, sat a silver Honda Accord. There was blood on the driver's side of the car. More blood was inside, including a significant amount in the rear passenger area. And beneath the front of the Honda, lying face down in the water, was a man still dressed for work. His federal courthouse identification remained around his neck. His name was Jonathan Luna. He was a 38-year-old assistant United States attorney, a husband, and a father of two children. Less than 6 hours earlier, Jonathan had walked out of a federal courthouse in Baltimore. He was expected back the following morning to complete a plea agreement. But instead of driving home, Jonathan traveled north through 3 states. Along the way, someone withdrew cash using his bank card. His debit card purchased gasoline. The driver stopped using the car's EZ Pass and began collecting paper toll tickets. And before the Honda left the Pennsylvania Turnpike, Jonathan was already bleeding. When his body was examined, investigators documented 36 stab wounds and cuts, 23 around his neck. But the wounds were not the immediate cause of his death. Jonathan Luna had drowned. The local coroner ruled his death as a homicide. Federal investigators reportedly considered another possibility, that Jonathan had been alone and may have inflicted the wounds on himself, perhaps while attempting to stage an abduction. More than 2 decades later, no one has been arrested, and even after the release of Jonathan's autopsy records, the central mystery remains. What happened during Jonathan Luna's final 6 hours, and was anyone else in his car? Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Murder in the Black. I'm your host, Steph. Jonathan Luna's case has resisted a simple explanation for more than 2 decades because almost every major piece of evidence can be read in two different ways. The wounds may indicate an attack or self-infliction. The blood in the back seat may suggest another person or Jonathan moving through the vehicle himself. His unexplained drive may have been forced, planned, or connected to a private meeting no one has ever identified. Today, we are going to reconstruct that drive, examine what the newly released autopsy establishes, and separate documented evidence from claims that remain unproven. Jonathan's death is officially classified as a homicide. No one has been charged with killing him, and no agency has publicly proved that he caused his own death. Before Jonathan Luna became the subject of one of the strangest investigations involving a federal prosecutor, he was a son, husband, father, and a man who built an impressive career in public service. Jonathan Paul Luna was born on October 21st, 1965, in New York City. His mother was a Black woman from the South, and his father was Filipino. Jonathan grew up in the Patterson houses near Yankee Stadium in the South Bronx. From there, he built a life through education, public service, and the law. Jonathan graduated from Fordham University before continuing his education at the University of North Carolina School of Law. While attending law school, Jonathan reportedly took time away to help care for his father, who was ill. When he returned, he became the president of his law school and completed his degree in 1992. That detail tells us something important about Jonathan. Taking time away could have completely interrupted his plans. Instead, he came back and finished. Friends and former classmates remembered him as warm, personable, and able to connect with people regardless of their position. One former colleague described Jonathan as the kind of person who quickly learned about everyone around him, from the people cleaning the building to those occupying its most powerful offices. After law school, Jonathan clerked for a federal judge and worked briefly at the Washington law firm Arnold and Porter. He then moved into government service, working for the Federal Trade Commission before becoming a prosecutor in Brooklyn. In 1999, Jonathan joined the United States Attorney's Office in Baltimore. This was not some attorney struggling to find his place. By 38, Jonathan had already graduated from law school, worked in private practice, served at the Federal Trade Commission, prosecuted cases in New York, and became a federal prosecutor in Maryland. He had also built a family. Jonathan was married to Dr. Angela Hopkins, an obstetrician, and they had two children. The family lived in Baltimore County. From the outside, Jonathan appeared successful, but as we have seen in so many cases, the image visible to the public does not always reveal what someone may be carrying privately. At the time of his death, Jonathan was reportedly dealing with significant financial and professional pressure. Those circumstances would later become central to the theory that he might have caused his own injuries. But before we discuss that theory, we need to understand what happened inside the courtroom on Jonathan's final day. On December 3rd, 2003, Jonathan was prosecuting a federal case against Dion Smith and Walter Poindexter. The government accused the men of participating in heroin distribution operations allegedly connected to a Baltimore recording studio. Smith was associated with the rap industry, and the case involved allegations of violence and drug trafficking. The prosecution had relied on a witness named Warren Grace. But during the trial, serious questions emerged about Grace's background and his relationship with law enforcement. Because Grace had reportedly worked as a paid FBI informant, the defense was entitled to know about that relationship and any benefits or credibility problems connected to it. The defense argued that prosecution had failed to disclose important information, and the judge reportedly criticized the government's handling of the witnesses. By the afternoon of December 3rd, the parties began negotiating a plea agreement. According to reports from that time, Jonathan and the defense attorneys had reached the substance of an agreement by approximately 5 o'clock. However, the paperwork still had to be completed. At 9:06 that evening, Jonathan called one of the defense attorneys. He reportedly said that he was still working on the documents and wanted to ensure everything was correct. That call becomes important because it places Jonathan alive and actively working only a few hours before he left the courthouse. Jonathan reportedly told the attorneys that he would fax the completed documents, but the fax never arrived. At approximately 11:38 p.m., security records showed Jonathan leaving the federal courthouse through the Hanover Street exit. He left his cell phone behind. Reports also indicate that he left his glasses in the office, even though he used them for driving. There is no publicly confirmed explanation for why he left those items behind. Maybe it was an oversight after an exhausting day. Maybe he believed he was making a short trip. Or perhaps leaving the phone was intentional. What happened next is documented through electronic transactions, toll records, and sightings, but those records do not explain why Jonathan went where he did. Jonathan did not drive toward his home. Instead, his Honda traveled northeast on Interstate 95. At some point, the car crossed from Maryland into Delaware. Jonathan initially used his EZ Pass, creating an electronic record of the car's movement. At approximately 12:57 a.m., someone withdrew $200 from Jonathan's bank account at an ATM located at the JFK Plaza service area near Newark, Delaware. Reports indicate that investigators reviewed available surveillance material, but its quality did not resolve every question about who was in the car. From Newark, the vehicle continued north. At approximately 2:47 a.m., Jonathan's car crossed the Delaware River toll bridge and entered the Pennsylvania Turnpike. At approximately 3:20 a.m., Jonathan's debit card was used to purchase gasoline at the King of Prussia Service Plaza. Witness information later led some investigators to believe Jonathan was traveling alone and did not appear to be in distress. But we need to be careful with that. A witness seeing one person outside a car does not necessarily prove no one else was involved. It also does not prove Jonathan was acting voluntarily during the entire journey. However, investigators reportedly found no clear public evidence showing another person accompanying him. There was also a gap in the timeline. Investigators estimated that the trip from Newark's service area to the Pennsylvania Turnpike should have taken approximately 40 minutes. Yet the documented time leaves roughly an hour unaccounted for. Where was Jonathan during that period? Did he stop somewhere? Did he meet someone? Was he lost? Was another person inside the vehicle? Or was he delaying his arrival at a destination only he understood? The car continued west on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. At 4:04 a.m., it exited at the Reading Lancaster interchange. A spot of Jonathan's blood was later found on the toll ticket. That small mark is one of the most important details in the entire case because it indicates that Jonathan was likely already bleeding when the vehicle exited the turnpike. It also creates another question. Why was a man with an easy pass collecting paper toll tickets? One possibility is simple. Perhaps the electronic pass malfunctioned or Jonathan chose not to use it. But another possibility is that someone wanted to avoid creating a complete electronic record of the car's movements. From the interchange, the drive to Ceasing and Weaver Well Drilling on Dry Tavern Road should have taken fewer than 10 minutes by the most direct route. But Jonathan's car was not discovered immediately. One employee arrived at the business at approximately 5 o'clock. He later indicated that he did not notice an unfamiliar vehicle when he arrived. He went inside, made coffee, and prepared for the workday. Around 5:30 a.m., the Honda was noticed near the creek. That creates another possible gap. If the employee's recollection was accurate, Jonathan's car may have arrived sometime between 5 and 5:30. What happened between the 4:04 exit from the turnpike and the discovery of the car more than an hour later? The available records tells us where the vehicle entered the area. They do not tell us where it traveled afterward. The scene was located behind the well drilling business in Burnock Township, a rural area of the Lancaster County. Jonathan's Honda was positioned with its front end in the creek. Some accounts reported that the engine was still running when it was found, while others described the car with its lights off and its front end partially submerged. Because early reporting contained conflicting information, the safest conclusion is that the car was found at the edge of or partly inside the water. Blood was visible on the driver's side door in the front left portion of the vehicle. Inside, investigators discovered extensive blood staining, including what was described as a pool of blood in the rear passenger area. Then they found Jonathan. He was lying face down in the creek, beneath or near the front portion of his car. He was still dressed in the suit and overcoat he had worn to work. His federal courthouse identification remained around his neck. Jonathan had injuries to his head and multiple cuts and stab wounds across his body. His own small pocket knife was connected to those wounds. Despite the number of injuries, water in Jonathan's lungs established that he was still alive when he entered the creek. He had drowned. That means the wounds, however serious, did not cause his immediate death. Somehow, after suffering those injuries, Jonathan entered the water or was placed there while he was still breathing. Lancaster County Coroner Barry Walp classified Jonathan's death as a homicide. The cause was documented as freshwater drowning associated with multiple stab wounds. That official homicide determination has never changed. For years, the full autopsy report remained unavailable to the public. What people knew came from official statements, news reports, leaks, and descriptions from investigators. That created an environment in which fact, inference, and rumor began mixing together. In 2020, journalists sought access to the coroner's records. A judge initially kept them sealed, reasoning that disclosure could interfere with an open and active criminal investigation. That decision was significant because nearly 2 decades after Jonathan's death, authorities were still describing the case as active. In November of 2025, a judge ordered the records unsealed after prosecutors stopped opposing their release. The autopsy documented 36 sharp force injuries or cuts. 23 were located around Jonathan's neck. Additional injuries appeared on his chest, abdomen, leg, and other parts of his body. 19 of the wounds were described as superficial. That word, superficial, has driven much of the suicide theory. Shallow, repetitive wounds can sometimes be interpreted as hesitation wounds, particularly when they appear in areas a person could reach themselves. But superficial does not mean meaningless. The location, direction, depth, accessibility, and pattern of each wound must be considered. A person attempting to defend himself could also sustain shallow cuts. An attacker could inflict superficial wounds intentionally as torture or intimidation, and a victim trapped inside a moving vehicle might not be able to resist in a way that produces the defensive injuries people expect. The autopsy also described extensive blood staining on Jonathan's clothing and punctures or cuts through the shirt and right pant leg. Although many of the wounds were described as superficial, the extensive blood staining showed that Jonathan had been bleeding before he entered the creek. According to the coroner's determination, the manner of death was homicide, but the report did not identify who inflicted the wounds. The distinction is important. An autopsy can document how a body was injured, what physical process caused the death, and whether the medical examiner considers the death natural, accidental, suicidal, homicidal, or undetermined. It cannot always reconstruct every action that occurred before death. So, although the 2025 release confirmed that the coroner officially considered Jonathan's death a homicide, it didn't solve the case.
Quick pause just in case you're locked in right now. I want to make sure that you're subscribed to Murder in the Black and you press that bell icon so that you can keep up on our updates. For exclusive episodes and subscriber only content, consider becoming a paid subscriber. Here's a little nugget. We have a 3-day free trial on Apple Podcasts just in case you want to figure out the lay of the land first before you commit. Storytime with Steph is back. That is where I present many true crime stories you won't always hear on our main feed, but the stories deserve to be told. You can watch that on whatever social media platform you enjoy us on. But I especially want those of you who are on TikTok to know that I'm back, and this is where we started our Murder in the Black community. One more quick favor. Make sure you leave a 5-star rating and review if you enjoy the work here. Let's get back into our story.
It did, however, make the divide between the competing interpretations even harder to ignore. By the time investigators began reconstructing Jonathan's movements, they knew he had been bleeding before he left the turnpike. What they could not determine was whether he was driving willingly or whether someone else was directing where the Honda went next. The homicide theory begins with the most obvious fact. Jonathan had been stabbed and cut 36 times for drowning in a creek. There was blood in multiple areas of his car, including the rear passenger compartment. Supporters of the homicide theory question why Jonathan would move between different positions inside the vehicle while injuring himself. A large amount of blood in the back suggests that at some point, Jonathan or someone who was bleeding occupied the area. If Jonathan were being controlled by another person, the rear seat could have been where part of the assault occurred. The blood on the toll ticket shows that he was injured before reaching the location where his body was found. That means this was not necessarily one sudden incident beside the creek. Whatever happened may have unfolded over a much longer period. The car also traveled a complicated route that had no obvious connection to Jonathan's home, workplace, or publicly known plans. Why would Jonathan leave his office shortly before midnight and drive across multiple states without his phone or glasses? One answer is that he was meeting someone. An early FBI release reportedly stated that investigators had evidence suggesting Jonathan may have had contact with someone between leaving his office and being found. A former FBI official later disputed the idea that investigators possess clear evidence of another person accompanying him. That disagreement alone demonstrates how fractured the investigation became. There were also reports of a partial fingerprint in blood that might not have belonged to Jonathan. Public reporting about that evidence has varied, and no suspect has been identified throughout it. If another person's blood or fingerprint was found, it could be important. But context matters, as it often does. Cars accumulate fingerprints, and not every biological trace is connected to a crime. Jonathan was a federal prosecutor. His occupation naturally raised concerns about retaliation. Had someone connected to one of his cases targeted him? Was the death meant to send a message? Initially, the case Jonathan was prosecuting seemed like an obvious place to look. But the defendants accepted plea agreements after his death, and no public evidence has connected either man to what happened to Jonathan. A professional motive remains possible in the broadest sense, but possibility isn't evidence. There's also the manner in which Jonathan died. If he intentionally entered shallow water, why did he remain face down long enough to drown? Was he physically weakened by blood loss? Did he lose consciousness? Was he disoriented from a head injury? Or did someone hold him there? To Jonathan's family and the Lancaster County authorities, who treated this death as a homicide, the number of injuries, the blood inside the car, and the final position of his body pointed toward another person's involvement. But federal investigators were reportedly considering a very different explanation. But as investigators looked more closely at Jonathan's wounds and the pressure surrounding him, the story became less straightforward. What appeared to be an attack could, they believed, have been something Jonathan created himself. The alternative theory is not simply that Jonathan deliberately drowned himself. It's that he might have created the appearance of an attack or kidnapping, possibly intending to disappear temporarily, explain missing time, or escape mounting pressure, and then lost control of what he started. This theory relies heavily on Jonathan's circumstances before his death. Reports indicated that he carried approximately $25,000 in debt, including credit card accounts his wife may not have known about. There were also reports that someone using Jonathan's name had visited or posted on an adult-oriented website. Those claims became part of the speculation about whether he was meeting someone privately. But a name appearing online does not automatically establish that Jonathan created the profile or arranged the meeting. Unless investigators can't authenticate the account, we should not treat that as an established fact. More significant were the problems at work. In a prior bank robbery prosecution, approximately $36,000 in cash had disappeared. The money reportedly vanished while being transferred between government agencies or storage locations. Jonathan had handled aspects of the case, and reports indicated that he was expected to undergo a polygraph examination. Being asked to take a polygraph does not mean someone is guilty. Polygraphs are not infallible, and the request may have been part of an effort to eliminate everyone with access. Still, for Jonathan, the missing money could have represented a serious threat to his career and reputation. Add to that the problem in the drug case being tried during his final week, a government's witness informant history had become an issue, and the judge had criticized the prosecution. Some reports characterized Jonathan's relationship with his supervisor as strained and suggested he feared professional consequences. That combination, debt, secrecy, missing evidence, a troubled prosecution, and the possibility of a polygraph, became the suggested motive for self-harming or staging. Then investigators looked at the injuries. Many were shallow. There reportedly were not the extensive defensive wounds some would expect from a prolonged knife attack. The weapon was Jonathan's own pocket knife. Witnesses may have seen him traveling alone. No confirmed surveillance image publicly established the presence of an assailant. From that evidence, one theory emerged. Jonathan may have inflicted the wounds himself while traveling, perhaps to create the appearance that he had been kidnapped or attacked. The blood in the back seat could have been a result from Jonathan moving around inside the car. The $200 withdrawal could have been intended to fund a disappearance or create the impression of a robbery. The switch from the Easy Pass to paper tickets could have been an effort to make his movements harder to trace. Then, weakened by blood loss, Jonathan may have driven into the creek, exited or fallen from the car, lost consciousness in the shallow water, and drowned. But that theory has serious weaknesses. Why 36 wounds? Why injure the neck so many times? Why drive more than 100 miles into an unfamiliar rural area? What was supposed to happen next? What was in game? If Jonathan intended to stage a kidnapping, where was the evidence of a plan? Where was he going? Why keep his work identification around his neck? And most importantly, why did the coroner, after examining Jonathan's body, classify the death as a homicide? The stage abduction theory may explain individual details, but it requires us to accept a complicated series of actions for which no clear plan has ever been discovered. I want to pause on the missing $36,000 because it's easy for listeners to hear that detail and assume Jonathan stole it. There is no public finding establishing that Jonathan took the money. Cash evidence passes through multiple hands. It may be counted, packaged, transported, stored, checked out, and returned. A breakdown at any stage can result in money being lost or stolen. Jonathan's connection to the case made him someone investigators needed to question. It did not make him guilty. This is also where the way a person's private struggles are presented after death is significant. Once someone cannot answer for themselves, debt becomes a motive, a private credit card becomes evidence of a secret life, workplace pressure becomes proof of desperation, and an unverified online profile becomes an affair. Those details may be relevant, but they are not the entire conclusion. If Jonathan was murdered, this line of speculation risks transforming a victim into the architect of his own death. On the other hand, if investigators ignored those circumstances because they were uncomfortable or unflattering, they would also be failing to examine the full case. The correct approach is not to hide the evidence, it's to refuse to make the evidence say more than it actually proves. One of the most striking aspects of Jonathan's case is the disagreement between the agencies involved. The death occurred in Pennsylvania, but Jonathan worked for the federal government in Maryland. That brought local police, Pennsylvania authorities, the FBI, and the United States Attorney's Office into the same investigation. Lancaster County officials treated the case as a homicide. Federal investigators reportedly explored the possibility that Jonathan acted alone. Those are not minor variations in theory. Those are two fundamentally different understandings of what happened. If investigators believe they are searching for a killer, they process evidence differently than they would if they believe the deceased staged the scene. They ask different questions. They prioritize different witnesses. They interpret gaps in the timeline differently. And when agencies begin the investigation from opposing positions, evidence can be pulled toward whichever theory each side already finds more persuasive. Jonathan's family sought additional answers and pushed for a formal inquest. They also hired private investigators. In 2004, the FBI announced a reward for up to $100,000 for information that could help resolve the case. Yet no arrest followed. Years passed. The files remained sealed. In 2021, a judge refused to release the coroner's records because authorities maintained that disclosure could jeopardize an active investigation. Then, in 2025, prosecutors stopped opposing the release. That shift raises its own questions. Did investigators exhaust their remaining leads? Did the records become less sensitive because the investigation was no longer progressing? Or did officials decide that public transparency now outweighed the risk? The release gave the public more information, but it did not provide the answer Jonathan's family had waited more than 20 years to receive. The newly released autopsy narrows the boundaries of responsible speculation. It confirms the number and distribution of Jonathan's wounds, that he was alive when he entered the water, and that the coroner classified his death as a homicide. But it cannot tell us who held the knife, whether anyone accompanied Jonathan, or why he made that drive. The report gives us firmer facts without resolving what those facts mean. That is the frustrating reality of this case. Almost every major fact can support competing interpretations. 36 wounds sounds like an unmistakable attack until we learn that many were superficial and produced by Jonathan's own knife. A lack of defensive injuries sounds consistent with self-infliction until we consider that Jonathan could have been restrained, incapacitated, or attacked in an enclosed vehicle. Traveling alone supports the idea that he acted voluntarily unless someone entered the vehicle during one of the unexplained gaps. Blood in the backseat supports the presence of an attacker unless Jonathan moved there himself. Even the creek can be interpreted in two ways: a location chosen to stage a crime or a place selected by someone intending to kill him. And that brings us back to the creek. Regardless of which theory you believe, every explanation must account for the same final act. Jonathan entered the water alive. After reviewing the available evidence, I understand why investigators considered self-infliction. The shallow wounds, Jonathan's pocket knife, the reported absence of extensive defensive injuries, and the pressure surrounding him cannot responsibly be ignored. But considering a theory is not the same as proving it. The publicly available evidence does not establish that Jonathan acted alone. We do not know why he made the drive, where he spent the missing time, why blood was distributed across different parts of the vehicle, or what the intended conclusion of a staged abduction would have been. The homicide ruling is not infallible, but it is a medical determination made after an examination of Jonathan's body and the circumstances of his death. It should not be displaced by speculation about his finances or private life. At the same time, classifying a death as a homicide does not identify a killer. In forensic terms, homicide means death caused by the actions of another person. It does not automatically tell investigators who that person was or whether prosecutors can prove a criminal case. Based on what is publicly known, I believe Jonathan's death should remain treated as an unresolved homicide while investigators remain open to any explanation that can be supported by evidence. What should not happen is for an unproven theory about Jonathan's personal life to become a substitute for solving his death. Jonathan Luna spent his career working inside a system built around evidence. He understood that suspicion is not proof. He also understood that an accusation is not a conviction. And when the evidence leaves room for reasonable doubt, certainty cannot be simply declared. Yet after his death, Jonathan was denied that same clarity. If he was murdered, then someone took his life and has avoided accountability for more than 2 decades. If he created the circumstances that led to his death, then the reason remains hidden, and his family has been left with an official homicide ruling that cannot explain what happened. But uncertainty should not give us permission to turn fragments of Jonathan's life into conclusions. Debt does not prove desperation. Workplace scrutiny does not prove guilt. An unverified online profile does not establish a secret meeting. And 36 wounds, as shocking as that number is, do not by themselves tell us whose hand held the knife. Jonathan was more than the mystery surrounding his final hours. He was a child of South Bronx who reached federal courtrooms. He stepped away from law school to care for his father, returned, became class president, and completed his degree. He became a husband, a father, and a public servant. Here's what we do know. We know that Jonathan left the courthouse at 11:38 p.m. His car traveled through Maryland, Delaware, and Pennsylvania. We know that he was bleeding before he left the turnpike, and we know that hours later he entered that creek alive. The records can reconstruct the road. They still cannot tell us why he traveled it or whether he traveled it alone. Until they can, Jonathan Luna's story remains suspended between 2 possibilities, with neither one proven and neither one able to give his family what they deserve. After hearing the evidence, which fact do you believe investigators still need to explain before the case can be resolved? Is it the blood in the rear seat, the unexplained gaps in Jonathan's drive, pattern of his wounds, or the absence of confirmed evidence placing another person in the car? Share your thoughts respectfully. Jonathan's family remains connected to this story, and a theory should never be presented as established fact. Before we end today's episode, I want to remind anyone who hasn't checked their feed that we released a special interview with MD discussing the outcome of the Carmelo Anthony evidentiary hearing. I know our main episodes usually drop on Thursday, so you probably didn't check on Wednesday, didn't have a reason to. So I don't want you to miss that additional conversation. You guys haven't heard from MD in a while. This is for my OG Murder in the Black subscribers and listeners, and it was refreshing to have her back with us. Now, moving forward, MD will be contributing to Murder in the Black in a different capacity. She'll join me to offer her legal analysis on viral cases, developing stories, and select cases that we cover on our main feed. I encourage everyone to check out that interview. It's also available as a video episode, so you'll be able to see MD and I as we discuss the ruling, what happened during the hearing, and what the outcome means for Carmelo's case moving forward. Before you go, make sure you're following Murder in the Black so you never miss an episode. And make sure you follow us on whatever podcast platform you listen to us on. It makes it easier for other people to follow us. If you enjoy the podcast, the best way for you to say thank you is to leave a 5-star review. Share this episode with someone who loves thoughtful true crime storytelling. And follow us on social media for clips, updates, and conversations throughout the week. For additional episodes and exclusive content, join the paid subscription on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. New subscribers can begin with a 3-day free trial on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, this is Murder in the Black.